Hello everyone, so welcome to a Second Thoughts overview of Zhao Ming of Grand Cathay. As always, I went through the initial turns to have a feel for the faction, and I have a few conclusions on how I would play it. In the end of the video, as always, I'll show you what army compositions I would like to try out, and of course, feel free to share your own experience as well. This is not an in-depth guide, but will certainly help out to understand the faction better and decide how to achieve your goals. Now let's go play then with Zhao Ming, the Iron Dragon. For your short victory condition, it is quite easy. You need to destroy the faction of the Dissenter Lords of Jin Shen, so basically some rebels, and then to maintain control of the Warpstone Desert, located here, the Wastelands of Jin Shen, and the Ivory Road. Pretty standard thing. You also need to occupy, loot, raise or sack 30 different settlements. Now, very easy campaign, I would say, especially for the short victory, I would say, but it does involve getting you into the mountains, so be wary of that. It's unlike, let's say, Miaoying, it does allow you, force you into a little bit away from the Cathayan lands. Now, the short victory gives you hero capacity +3 for all heroes. It's useful, but you only have 2 heroes, so less useful than in other factions. It will allow you, however, as always, to at least recruit more heroes without spending too much on buildings and too many building slots for those. The long victory campaign, it's a little bit longer, of course. It needs the short victory campaign, the occupy, loot, raise or sack 70 different settlements, and then a bunch of factions to destroy. The Rebel Lords of Nanying, the Dissenter Lords once more, the Puppets of Misrule, so Village, and then the Heralds of the Tempest. Also the Blessed Dread, you can see in the minimap here. I wish it would maintain the minimap as I was doing this, and Clan Eshin, look at it here. So basically all the threats are nearby the main Cathayan lands, other than the uninhabitable climate, the people, the Puppets of Misrule located here, and the Heralds of the Tempest. So this may prove a problem when you have to move into undesirable climate to finish off your main main enemies. Now, you also need to maintain control of the following 3 provinces, which is the Western, Central, and Eastern Great Bastion. Basically, of course, Miaoying or anyone else that is an ally to your vassal can control those, but for the most part it will probably become your necessity to be there. So this is a very long campaign indeed, and the fact that it forces you into maybe some uninhabitable climate may prove difficult. Now, hero recruits rank +10 in all provinces. It's always great to ensure that you have a stronger hero right off the gate. Now, Zhao Ming, he's the ruler of the western provinces. He enjoys maximum cargo capacity of 20% for caravans. This is great, more income basically. You also have a hero recruit rank +5 for alchemists. If you think about it, you would have 15 after long victory, so alchemists would always be great right off the bat. Upkeep -25% for ogre mercenary units, so of course you can have some ogre mercenary there, so pay less, and armor +15 for any melee units. Of course, his focus is on the melee, and he does that really well. Climates, as you've seen, they are quite average to bad, I would have to say. The initial area, it's quite big from Cathay, of course, but you'll have to either confederate or destroy Zhao Ming in order to, have it all. And then nearby you already have some bad locations or some unpleasant locations that you need to go, and your main long victory campaign needs to go through uninhabitable. And following that, you also it's a very difficult campaign to conquer the whole map with. May prove interesting, of course, but be wary of replenishment issues and of any issues with building up some buildings, because of course they will never provide you the same thing as it would provide the Cathayan lands, Yeah, not the easiest one to control every part of the map. Your starting location is a 3-settlement province, which you only have the minor settlement there. It's quite in the middle of things. It makes things difficult. It's very difficult to defend from all sides, so be sure that you'll need some alliances and treaties to be safe for a while. Typical expansion is to go into the north or the east here, and of course you will need the west, at least the Ivory Road, controlled in order to achieve the short victory condition and thus the long. You always have the issue with the unpleasant and uninhabitable terrain, but you do have access to the sea lanes nearby, so maybe that can become an interesting campaign of going somewhere else, of course. Now, the Bastion is more of Miao Ying's concern, but of course it may become yours, especially if Miao Ying is defeated, or if anyone else starts controlling it. So at one point you'll have to at least figure out what's happening with the Bastion to see if you need to go there and appease things. But yeah, for sure, a different view from Miao Ying would be this is a harder campaign in my preview of it than Miao Ying for sure, just based on your starting location. So diplomatically, you're part of the Order Tide. So basically, the Empire, Kislev, the High Elves, the Dwarves, those will definitely become your friends, your Bretonnia as well. Now, Goldtooth here, the Ogres, they do have good history with you. So that idea alone may provide you with some good, at least paths and alliances. It's a nice addition to your friends list, just to ensure that at least nothing bad comes from these mountains for some time. Now, enemies is anything truly evil. Chaos, Dark Elves, the Skaven, Beastmen, Norska, and then at one point, of course, lots of ogres and greenskins as well. You'll have the threat of the vampire counts here, and also Nurgles, so be wary. I think there's a lot of variety close by, so every campaign may feel different depending on who gets ahead and who gets to wage war on you. Outposts will probably be based more onto the Kislev cavalry, or maybe ogres for some monstrous infantry, some monstrous cavalry, or the Empire if you can reach them, of course, by all means. Just benefit from that good cavalry, and especially because you do engage with melee units, that would be a nice addition for your forces. So in terms of mechanics, Yin and Yang dominate all the other mechanics from Grand Cathay. The harmony mechanic forces you to balance out most of the actions that actually do. This includes which buildings to construct, which characters to recruit, deciding events, and researching more technologies. Now, there's not just one way to do this. Your focus should be to try and predict how it will be in the next turn and keep adapting to it. It is always useful to do things in terms of pairing, as in you build one building that provides yin, and then another one that provides yang, and then you research one yin, research one yang, etc. The buffs, as you can see, when they are equal, are crazy good. So, of course, that helps out a lot. Now, the Ivory Road, it's a nice mechanic. This implies a caravan that is sent out for some good old-fashioned gold. Now, it may fall under attack, and it will have certain events that you need to focus on, but it is very tempting, of course, so be wary of its path. Of course, it will generate some gold, it will give you out some good relations with some other factions precisely, so it will give you knowledge of those locations, which is always great. Now, let's talk about the other mechanic, which is the Wuxing Compass. Now, this is basically a set of buffs that you can choose for a specific duration. However, once you align to one location, as I've done here, it decreases the others. So these ones are decreasing, and this one is increasing. Active when direction is set, this means that these ones are available. Now, of course, it will take 6 turns until this can be changed, which is why you need to really plan out which direction the Wuxing Compass goes through. In terms of the Bastion, that mechanic over there, this is basically just a threat meter. Once it is full, you may have some invasions here in the north to the Bastion, and of course, who will mostly deal out with this is your friend and sister Miao Ying, but at one point you may have to deal with this, so by all means be prepared. Enjoy the defensive battles, of course. If you do not control it, try to reinforce it, or at least have someone nearby to see what happens. A small note is for the yin and yang in armies, by the way. Every single unit has a yin or yang passive ability, which of course this is active if there is a nearby other unit nearby, so have the yin passive ability, if you have the yang passive ability here, if you have a yin unit available nearby. This means that even though you are focused on melee units, you will always benefit from having some yin army units at least accompanying them while they're fighting in melee. As for the province edicts, you have a control and less chance of a plague spreading. You also have a research rate one. This is always excellent. Enemy campaign movement range, less corruption, less melee defense, less recruit cost, and more local recruitment capacity. Even though low, it may help. Then we also have an income from trade tariffs faction-wide. Just a note on the research rate. The best way to use this is when it is meaningful, as in, don't use it just on one, because it won't have an effect. Try to maximize that. If you have like 5 provinces, then you can check the research and see how many you need to activate, so that the research would cost 1 less turn. This is why it's so good to have these ones, because you can activate and see the immediate effect. By the way. So in terms of army stances, they're quite your typical ones. You have channeling, campaign movement range 10% required, then Winds of Magic Power Reserve, of course. Have the incamp, pretty basic, immune to attrition, enables recruitment, replenishment, and access to global recruitment. Raiding, of course, the typical one, 50% movement range penalty, and immune to most attrition, of course. And then you have the ambush with 25% movement range penalty. That is about it. A special note, I was forgetting, that you don't have a growth edict, which is kind of an issue, so you'll have to find sometimes some other forms of growth. This is just a note that I had there. So there are no special buildings in your initial province, and your full military province would require 6 buildings, with 5 required to be in the capital. Only the Jade Barracks can be built in the minor settlement, to the fullest, of course. At tier 3 you have moderate armies, Jade Warriors, even with halberds as well, some moderate cavalry with the Jade Lances, some Crane Gunners, which is good that they are tier 3 at least, of course some Iron Hell Gunners, some Grand Cannons, and the Sky Lantern. Nothing too fancy, of course. You'll need the tier 4 and tier 5 Celestial Dragon units to really have great units, and the Terracotta Sentinel, of course, it's always great. Now, in terms of infrastructure, this changes a little bit, because it follows the yin and yang again. Now, for the yang, let's start here. We have a growth, construction cost reduction, you have an income building, and we have a control plus recruit rank for peasant longspearmen and peasant archers, which is great. You have to consider always that. For the yin, you have a growth and income from all buildings, you have an income plus income from trade tariffs, and then we have a control, casualty replenishment rate, and less recruitment cost, almost for free. Really severely reduced cost for peasant longspearmen and peasant archers. So you can focus on which one. All of them are really good. Nevertheless, it's not really that much of a choice. I would say this is more of trying to balance out that typical yin and yang. So you have to keep in mind all the changes. One of the best ideas is, like I stated, try to construct stuff in pairs, for example. Finally, research. One of the coolest ones, actually. I would say this because it turns the low peasants into quite solid units by the end game. So I'll not show you too many in the army compositions, but trust me, use them. You'll still be surprised by how effective they are. It follows the same yin and yang principle, of course, so be wary of that, and it's honestly one of the most rewarding research trees, especially for your units. So be sure to check how much you improve your units, how much it improves everything, and be on the lookout for something that improves your research rate. Eat it. Of course, don't be negligent of it, because you'll definitely it's definitely a mechanic in its own when there's so much stuff going on here. As you know, skills are divided into lord-specific ones, your yellow line, or combat, or the magic line as well, as you can see here. You also have the red line, or army, and the blue line, or the campaign one. Now, Zhao Ming is all about the melee, as you can see there, so your front line and melee units will be quite stronger than when in other armies. Red line is quite expensive, so it is good to spend some time deciding which units you'll be buffing up beforehand. Now the blue line may prove expensive as well. Nothing too important in the beginning, maybe attrition, since you're going to be having a lot of issues with climate. And then of course you have quartermasters and logistician for casualty replenishment rate and less upkeep, which I typically go for, but nothing wrong with you using different ones, you know, for ambush defense chance, for instance, if you prefer. But it's quite expensive in that regard. Now, in terms of the Lord Magistrates, let me show you here with this one from the caravan. They do have some nice abilities that you can get for your units, of course, but still, in essence, they are just a basic lord, of course, that you can choose. You'll have your caster lords or your alchemists, for instance, your heroes to accompany you, with the alchemists having the lore of metal and the other ones having the lore of heavens, if not mistaken. Yeah. And then all of them have some special abilities, so be wary, try to find them out. Unfortunately, none has, actually, there's no replenishment hero, which is sad. It may imply a more difficult to overcome any losses after battle. And considering the climate issues that you may have, that is a problem in itself. So here are the red line skills for the faction. They are divided mostly into categories, with infantry here, all missiles, kinda all missiles. If all missiles were together, I think the faction would be much better, actually. It means that it's difficult to do all compositions of units, as you see later on, without having to spend too much. But yeah, we can have a few compositions here and there. Now, Zhao Ming does buff up every melee unit, so of course compositions where you do have plenty of melee units are important, but don't forget the yin and yang mechanics, so always have at least some units so that you can some ranged units so that you can benefit from that. Now, one idea, for instance, is to use the flying units. They can hover over the infantry and just provide them that buff while still being useful. So that's an idea here that I would use. But note how 1, 2, 3, 4 units basically mean 19 skill points. They're very well divided. That's a big issue for the faction. In terms of course, red line. This is probably one of the basic army compositions that I would try to use, you know, just something to snipe enemies, just something for some blobs, the sentinels just to, you know, because they're cool. But yeah, that's the sort of idea. Now, in terms of the different typical armies, as you can see, always very expensive red line skills to buff all those units, but nothing wrong with some generalized celestial units. Of course, these halberds are basically also your best standing infantry. They're expensive, but of course you can manage. Some artillery also, like, really nice, and then maybe some cav, some flying cavalries, or some sentinels. Up to you guys. This is more, let's say, of a standard army that you would use as a sweeper army, for instance, less expensive, perhaps. That's the sort of idea that I want you to have. Remember, even low peasant units will become very powerful, especially in the end with all the research. So you can definitely have these sweeper armies to engage minor enemies, while your strongest face off against the true elite. Like, don't send this against the chosen stacks. Send that instead, or send this instead, you know. So, in overview, the faction has an amazing potential in terms of synergy. If you manage everything to be perfectly balanced, your faction feels amazing. Armies always rely on other units to be excellent, which also adds to the bit of work in terms of maintaining formation. It's quite interesting. It's a different take from other ranged focused factions or melee focused factions, so it's good. Just like the Miao Ying campaign, you have a distinct feeling throughout the campaign that every action that you take really takes part in a great plan. It's a very good feeling for me. It's addicting. I want to start a campaign with these guys just to see how well I can do in that regard. It's one of the most likely factions as well to be easy for a new player, but very hard to master, especially Zhao Ming, because of his location. I would recommend for a new player Miao Ying for sure. Then head on. Now, Unlike Miaoying, of course, a focus on the south part of Cathay may also bring you closer to the sea lanes, so to add a different take on the faction and a replay value maybe. Who knows, that would be a nice idea to have a Zhao Ming that actually becomes sort of a pirate. For your army, you have good holding infantry, great missiles and artillery, good flying units, good single entities, good magic users. It's weak in anti-large outside infantry. Replenishment is rather average, especially concerning climate, of course, like I've said many times. Still, I believe now it is time to fight for Zhao Ming, the Iron Dragon.